I'm going to read just a few words out of this. It's called my first message. It says, the triumphal entry of Jesus. When they arrived near Jerusalem, Jesus sent two disciples with the instruction. He said, go over to the village across from you, and you'll find a donkey there, her colt with her. Untie her and bring them to me. If anyone asks what you're doing, say the master needs them, and he will send them with you. So why do you think Jesus didn't ride something more fancier, like a chariot? We're going to get into that. This is the full story of what was sketched earlier by the prophets. Look, your king is on his way, riding a donkey. The disciples went and did exactly what Jesus told them to do. They led the donkey and the colt out, laid some of their clothes on them, and Jesus began to ride. Let me show you a picture of that. Nearly all the people in the crowd threw their garments down on the road, giving Jesus a royal welcome. Others cut branches from the trees and threw them down as a welcome mat. And crowds, they went ahead and crowds followed, all of them calling out, Hosanna to David's son! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven! And as he made his entrance into Jerusalem, the whole city was shaken. Unnerved, people were asking, what's going on here? Who is this? And the parade crowd answered, this is the prophet Jesus, the one from Nazareth in Galilee. Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, what are you willing to give me if I hand him over to you? So they counted him out 30 silver coins. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover? And he replied, go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12, and while they were eating, he said, I tell you the truth, one of you will betray me. And they were very sad and began to say to him and one another, surely not I, Lord. And Jesus replied, the one who has dipped his hand in the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born. Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely not I, Rabbi. And Jesus answered, yes, it is you. And while they were eating, Jesus took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat. This is my body. Then he took the cup and gave thanks and offered it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is the blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. And I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus told them, this very night you will all fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. But Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. I tell you the truth, Jesus answered, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all of the other disciples said the same. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he turned to his disciples, and he found them sleeping. "Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray, so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak." And he went away a second time and prayed, "Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he found the sleeping disciples, because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed a third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour is near, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." While he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd, armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you came for." Then the men stepped forward and seized Jesus and arrested him. After Jesus was arrested in the middle of the night, he was immediately taken to Caiaphas' house, where he was held without sleep until all of the Pharisees could be gathered for a staged trial to commence. All of the disciples had scattered and left Jesus alone during that sleepless night. Peter followed Jesus, but in a distance out of fear of being recognized and arrested.
And as the Pharisees gathered, they began to put their scheme into action. They confronted and challenged Jesus on his claim that he was the Son of God. Jesus did not say much when questioned, but the Pharisees did all they could do to find him guilty by twisting his words. Once they claimed his guilt, they agreed to bring him before Pontius Pilate and demand him to be crucified.
While the trial was going on, Peter stood outside the gate of Caiaphas' home trying to hear what was taking place. Near him, others were gathered around a warm fire, and someone asked if he was one of Jesus' followers. But Peter denied it and moved away from that group. As he was walking away, another asked the same question, and he denied it again. A third person asked Peter once more if he had followed Jesus, and as he denied it, the rooster crowed just as Jesus had said. In that moment, Peter felt his heart sink.
As the sun was just beginning to rise, the Pharisees arrived at Pontius Pilate's home, dragging Jesus along, hands bound like a common criminal. They threw him before Pilate and demanded him to be crucified for heresy. Pilate examined Jesus, and once again Jesus speaks few words to respond to Pilate's questioning. In doing so, Pilate finds no guilt in Jesus and sends him to King Herod, who simply returns Jesus back to Pilate to deal with.
By now, Pilate was growing weary of the crowd and feared an uprising which would threaten his position of authority. Hoping to appease the crowd, Pilate offered to release one prisoner because of a Passover tradition. He offered Jesus or Barabbas to the crowd, knowing that Barabbas was guilty and dangerous, while Jesus was only threatening to the Pharisees. At the leading of the Pharisees, the crowd called for the release of Barabbas. Pilate then asked what he should do with this Jesus of Nazareth, and the crowd chanted louder and louder, "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate washed his hands to symbolize that he was innocent of this man's blood.
Pilate had Jesus publicly flogged to the maximum amount that wouldn't kill him, then released Jesus to the Pharisees to do what they wanted. The Roman guards who flogged Jesus mocked him and made him a crown of long thorns, pressing it onto his head, then draping him in purple cloth, and sarcastically calling him the king. Then they began to lead him through the city, toward Golgotha, where he would be crucified. Along the way, Jesus fell from exhaustion, and the Roman guards leading Jesus pulled a man out of the crowd named Simon to help Jesus carry his cross the rest of the way.
When they arrived at the place where Jesus would be crucified, they stripped him and laid him on the beams of wood. They began to drive the nails into Jesus' hands and feet, and the pain was unbearable. As Jesus was lifted on his cross, he cried out to God, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." By then a crowd had formed.
2 other criminals were crucified with Jesus and were raised, one on each side of him. The criminal on his one side of Jesus mocked him, telling him to save all 3 of them if he really was the Son of God. But the other criminal had compassion, knowing Jesus' innocence, and humbly asked to be remembered by Jesus when he entered his kingdom. Jesus turned to that man and said, "Today you will be with me in paradise."
Sometime later, Jesus was growing weaker from the crucifixion, and he shouted, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus felt the weight of the world's sin on his shoulders as he hung there bloodied, bruised, and broken. Soon, Jesus knew he was dying, and with his last breath said, "It is finished."
Right as Jesus died, the ground shook and the sky darkened, and the curtain in the temple tore in half. One of the guards near the cross said, "Surely this man is the Son of God." Another guard pierced Jesus' side with a spear to confirm his death before allowing Jesus' followers to take him for burial. After he was placed in a tomb, it was sealed with a large rock and guarded by soldiers.
Early in the morning on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that they had moved the stone away from the entrance. She ran at once to Simon Peter and the other disciple, breathlessly panting. "They took the Master from the tomb, and we don't know where they've put him." Peter and the other disciple ran neck and neck. The other disciple got to the tomb first, outrunning Peter. Stooping to look in, he saw the pieces of linen cloth lying there. Simon Peter arrived after him and entered the tomb, and observed the linen cloths lying there. Then the other disciple, the one who had gotten there first, went into the tomb, and he took one look at the linens, and he believed. The disciples then went back home. But Mary stood outside the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she knelt to look inside the tomb and saw 2 angels sitting there, one at the head and the other at the foot of where Jesus' body had been laid. And they said to her, "Woman, why do you weep?" "They took my master," she said, "and I don't know where they put him." And after she said this, she turned away and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't recognize him. And Jesus spoke to her, "Woman, why do you weep? Who were you looking for?" She, thinking it was the gardener, said, "Mister, if you took him, tell me where you put him so I can care for him." And Jesus said, "Mary." Turning to face him, she said, "Teacher."